YouTube, we have a problem. What is up, guys? Doomwake here. Welcome to another video on the channel. Today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. For those of you who have been following my content and my posts and tweets over the past few months, you'll know that I am not in, I don't really have the greatest opinion of the modern format right now. And I know that might be a controversial take because a lot of people are really enjoying the format. And you know what? That's fine. I'm not saying that you're wrong. You are totally allowed to enjoy the format, however you see fit, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. You can definitely enjoy playing Modern right now. I more so just want to give you my perspective as I've been playing so much Modern, again, maybe a little bit less since I started the full-time job and moved into more of like a part-time streaming thing. But even over the past few weeks, still played a decent bit of Modern, and I just wanted to give you an idea of where I stand on the format specifically. So there are some things that could change or things that could be a little bit better. So I wanted to go over that with you today. So let's get started. All right, let's get the elephant out of the room, or I guess in this case, the cat nightmare, Lurrus of the Dream Den. Now, a while back, I know I'm going to sound like a little bit of a boomer here. When Ikoria was released into the world, we didn't have to pay 3 mana to put Lurrus into our hand. We used to just be able to cast that thing right from the companion zone. Obviously, that was a little bit too good, and they, ultimately, after, I believe it was, 2 or 3 months that Lurrus was legal, they decided to make the companion change. And that was good, They definitely neutered the companions, and the companions definitely started to see a little bit less play. But I think when you have something that, with Lurrus, for example, that essentially I know that it does show a restriction for deck building on the card, but the thing is, it's not really a restriction because that's how you should probably be building your decks when Lurrus is legal anyways. And the reason for that is because Lurrus just puts a strain on the mid-range deck building aspect, because if you choose to not play with Lurrus and you play against other Lurrus decks, you just put yourself in such a huge disadvantage. Like, imagine for a second, you play Grixis Death Shadow without Lurrus and your opponent's playing Grixis Death Shadow with Lurrus. The fact that they have access to Lurrus and potentially Kolaghan's Command to keep looping it just puts you in such a massive disadvantage, because Lurrus is already a free card by itself, and it's going to bring another free card along with it. So in a mid-range matchup, you can't justify not playing Lurrus, because your opponent, when they play Lurrus, they're just going to be up 3 cards on you, and that amount of advantage is usually enough to just close the door by itself. So that's kind of the issue with Lurrus, is it restricts deck building to the point where if you're playing a fair deck, you essentially have to be playing with Lurrus to not be too far behind all of the other Lurrus decks. The other thing is, obviously, I'm going to sound like a bit of a Jun boomer when I say this, but, I want to play with my seasoned Pyromancers and Liliana the Veils, and, that is an argument, but it's more so Lurrus just restricting the card pool. It's not just Pyromancer, it's not just Liliana. It's that when you're playing, when you're going to build some sort of fair deck, whether it's like a Grixis deck or a Jun deck or something along these lines, you just, even if you're not playing against other Lurrus decks, it's really impossible to choose to play something like a Seasoned Pyromancer or, for example, Liliana the Veil over a Lurrus, just because of the advantage that Lurrus gives you, and it doesn't require you to make any significant deck building costs, right? And it's also an extra card in your opening hand. It's completely free. So it not only does it restrict deck building in the sense of you don't get to play 3 mana cards because you're just so far behind the other fair decks, but it also restricts deck building in the sense of you then have to make your deck in such a way that you have you have enough answers to these hyper efficient Lurrus decks, and that's when all these Lurrus decks just kind of look the same. Now, let's bring up some data for Lurrus for you. So on your screen, you see some online events. These are all the ones that I could find throughout the month of February. These include Magic Online Challenges, Magic Online PTQs, and then 227. The most recent one is actually the Magic Online Championship Finals. And the number next to each individual date is the amount of Lurrus decks that were in just the top 8. I didn't even go through the top 16. So we have, half of the top 8, half of the top 8, 3, 3, 5, half of the top 8, 5. So, you can see every single event, or at least the ones that I could find recorded on Magic Online, almost every single event has half Lurrus top 8s. And that's the other thing, is when Lurrus, because the card is so individually powerful and provides you so much advantage, it's really hard to justify playing anything that isn't a Lurrus deck. Unless you're like, okay, so you get into these points where the metagame is essentially Lurrus decks that have a pile of interaction, or the extremes, which are decks that try to completely ignore the interaction. Now, Hammer Time is a bit of a different animal, which I'll talk about in a second. But the Lurrus decks that have the pile of interaction are basically your Juns and your Grixuses of the world. So you have hyper efficient, low curve, threats, answers, all that kind of stuff. It's just a pile of answers and some creatures. And then you have the linear strategies, which try to completely ignore those, which are Goblin Charbelcher, Oops All Spells, to a lesser extent Crashing Footfalls, but they still, the way that the Footfalls decks are being built, or they're being built to ignore that part of the spectrum. And then, what's the other one? Amulet Titan. So you have two ends of the spectrum, which is just Lurrus, pile of interaction, plus, completely linear strategies. And it's just like when you have those two decks playing against each other, it almost just feels like two ships passing in the night, and the gameplay is not that great. Now, Hammer Time is a bit of a different animal because it's a Lurrus deck, right? But it's not really a Lurrus deck. I mean, we've seen Hammer Time lists that don't play Lurrus. So it's, in a sense, it's a Lurrus deck, but it doesn't really care about Lurrus that much. It's more so just like the hyper-linear strategies. But yeah, I mean, I just think that Lurrus, and the other problem, like moving long-term with Lurrus, you have to really be careful about what 1 and 2 mana permanents you put into the format, especially with Lurrus. And not only that, but again, just restricting the card pool, essentially making it so if you're playing a fair deck, you can't play 3 mana cards. That's the big thing here. It's not actually doing anything good for the format because it's restricting the card pool and allowing, it gives players essentially less options. And that's what I don't like about Lurrus. But for those reasons, I don't think that Lurrus, this might not be even at that unpopular of an opinion, because I've seen a lot of people on Twitter post this, but I am not the biggest fan of Lurrus in the format. All right, now here's another one. This one I know for a fact may or may not be pretty controversial, but Colossus Hammer. Now, let's talk about a card that is currently banned in the modern format. Well, there's two of them. First and foremost, Blazing Shoal. Second, Splinter Twin. Now, the thing about Blazing Shoal is a card that essentially allows you to pitch a random red, or not a random, but a red card from your hand, give a creature, it's an instant, give a creature +X/+O, or X is the converted mana cost of the red card. And that card was banned for being too consistent, too powerful. Now again, it was banned a long time ago. Modern's a lot different than what we had 7, 8, 9 years ago. I get that. The problem I have with Colossus Hammer and the general philosophy of the format, they are pretty adamant that they don't want to let Splinter Twin back into, essentially Splinter Twin is a combo that requires you to kind of play it in such a different way where it, requires you to have an answer or always keep an answer up, right? And that is essentially what Colossus Hammer is doing. It's requiring you to always have an answer, the difference being Colossus Hammer is active on turn 2. Splinter Twin is active on turn 4, right? Because you play the Exarch on 3, then you untap and have access to the Twin. Now, that's a pretty big gap between 2 and 4. Requiring people to have interaction, on turn 2 is kind of a lot to ask, You can only afford to play so many 1-mana removal spells in your deck when you're on the draw. Sometimes you're just not going to have one, and that sucks. When your opponent goes turn 1 Sigarda's Aid Ornithopter, and you just play your Triome, and then they just go, put a hammer on my thing, you're dead. I'm not a big fan of the fact that it basically requires you and forces you to play cards that you don't want to play just to make sure you have enough answers to the card on turn 2. And I just don't like the strain that it puts on gameplay. And, you know, again, just the comparisons to, obviously, Blazing Shoal, again, what that Modern was a lot different 10 years ago, I get that. But more so the comparison to Splinter Twin in terms of just requiring you to have an answer. Now, obviously Twin is a little bit different because Twin could play a control game and they could, you know, obviously re-interact with you. They could, like, counterspell your removal spell if you go for a removal spell on Deceiver Exarch or something along those lines. But I really don't think that Colossus Hammer adds a ton of good things to the format, and I would not be unhappy if it left the Modern format. So I think we should, I think it's Colossus Hammer's time to go. All right, and the last card that I want to talk about here today is Fury, but it's not just Fury, it's Fury and Solitude, maybe Grief to a lesser extent, but essentially the free MH2 elementals. Now, I don't really know why they thought that printing more free spells was a good idea, because I figured they would have learned their lesson from the last time that they did free spells. Phyrexian Mana, Gitaxian Probe, Mental Misstep, you know, Delve, things of that nature. Delve, I guess, is not free per se. The problem I have with Fury, maybe not as much Solitude, is it punishes the wrong people. You know, like, do we really want to be punishing the Merfolk players and the Humans players and the Elves players? Like, they're just trying to do some cool stuff. And I don't necessarily know if Fury is too oppressive, but I think that's just because when Fury started to pick up in popularity, those decks essentially just fell off the face of the earth because it was impossible to justify playing a deck with any number of creatures when you could just get Furied. Like, imagine you go turn 1 mana creature, turn 2 2 creatures, and you get Furied. The game is over. You're not winning. The game is literally over on the spot. I think Solitude is maybe okay because it is kind of punishing the right people in the sense of, you know, it's free interaction against Hammer Time, which, you know, any card that's good against Hammer Time, I'm all for it. But I think maybe it's a little bit too good with Ephemerate, and maybe Ephemerate's the problem card in these 4-color soup decks that play Yorion and all the free elementals and things of that nature. Maybe Ephemerate's the problem. But I think a lot of these 4-color decks are playing Fury and Solitude, and they're maybe not even playing that many Ephemerates. They still play a couple copies to go with Witness, but yeah, I don't think that Fury is punishing the right people, and I think that, you know, I'm not a huge fan, even though I love playing 4 copies in Rhinos, I'm not a huge fan of the card in the format, just because it, again, similar deck building restrictions. It's really hard to justify playing certain decks when this card is legal in the format. So I think Fury should probably go, but I don't know. I'm a little bit indifferent on this one. Let me know in the comments. Maybe Solitude could go as well. Maybe Ephemerate. This is kind of a tough one for me. But let me know in the comments. But that's my thoughts on Fury. Okay, time for a bit of a controversial take here. I actually think Ragavan is good for the format. There's a couple of reasons. Okay, now we just talked about Hammer Time, you know, requiring you to have certain answers, requiring you to play a bunch of 1-mana answers to be able to interact on turn 2. Ragavan is similar to that. However, the first Ragavan hit does not kill you on the spot. The first Colossus Hammer hit usually kills you on the spot. That's the big difference here. Is Ragavan a little bit too powerful? Potentially. Maybe it shouldn't have had dash. Maybe it shouldn't have made a treasure. There's a lot of different things you could do with Ragavan to make it a little bit weaker. But I think overall, the fact that it's a 1-mana 2/1, you know, when you're on the draw with a Ragavan, if you play it on turn 1, and they have Wrenn and 6, you know, you have to, like, if you're playing against a Wrenn and 6 deck, you have to decide if you want to play it or just hold it to dash. So there's some things to think about there at least. But I just wanted to kind of discuss Ragavan. I think maybe some of the numbers are a little bit too powerful, and I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if it eventually got the axe, but for now, I don't know. I think I'm okay with it, and again, this one definitely let me know in the comments about Ragavan. This one is more of a, you know, if Lurrus were to get banned, I think you would have to get rid of Yorion too, because I mean, we all know Lurrus and Yorion are the two best companions. We can all agree on that. They're the two most widely played, the two that require the least amount of deck building restrictions, and just the two most powerful. They just happen to be the most powerful ones that also require the least amount in terms of asking you to build your deck differently. I don't think Yorion is a problem as the format sits per se, but I think if Lurrus were to get the axe, I do think Yorion would be a little bit of a problem because just because of the mindset, the companion mindset. You know, if Lurrus goes, everybody's going to just say, okay, well, what companion can we play now? And maybe that opens up more of a bigger discussion here, is do we just get rid of all the companions entirely? You know, the weaker ones, like maybe Giganta is okay because the body is like, it's just a 5-mana 5/5. It doesn't have too much text in the game. It is a free card, but it's only a 5/5 for 5. Things like Zerda, maybe not that powerful. Umori, impossible deck building restriction. Like, maybe these ones are okay. But Lurrus and Yorion, I think if Lurrus goes, Yorion would have to go as well. But those are my thoughts on Yorion. Alright, with that, I'm going to wrap this video up. Again, be sure to let me know in the comments. I think we're going to be going back to some Magic content this week. I think I'm going to start with Pioneer. I don't think I'm still quite ready to go back into Modern yet, but maybe some Pioneer this week. Look out for that. If there's a Pioneer deck that you would like me to play, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see if I can take a look at it. And with that, that is all I got. So, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.